You did nothing yesterday. Maybe you sat by a window. Maybe you stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes. Maybe you let your coffee go cold because you couldn't bring yourself to get up and do anything yet. And at some point, probably around the time you finally moved, a voice appeared. You know the one. It said, "You're wasting time. You're falling behind. Everyone else is moving." That voice is almost certainly wrong, but it's almost certainly running your life. Here's the question this episode is really about. What if the most important thing you could do, not just for your sense of meaning, but for your actual functioning as a human being, requires you to stop? Not slow down, but stop. And what if the culture you live inside has made that so uncomfortable that you've confused stillness with failure? That's not a rhetorical question. It's a diagnosis, and most of us are walking around with the symptom and calling it ambition. We've been taught a specific lie about time, not a malicious lie, more like an inherited confusion. The lie is this: that time spent not producing something is time wasted. This idea is not ancient wisdom. It's an industrial era import. It grew from factory floors and ledger books and eventually moved into every corner of your personal life, your weekends, your mornings, your grief, your creativity, your relationships. The metric of output colonized all of it. So we end up in this strange situation where rest has to be justified. You don't just sleep, you optimize your sleep. You don't just walk, you track your steps. You don't just sit quietly, you call it mindfulness and put it on a schedule between 7:15 and 7:30 a.m. Even our pauses have been recruited into the productivity system. But here's what gets lost in all of that. Stillness isn't the absence of productivity. It's a different kind of engagement with being alive. And when you can't access it, when the moment you stop moving you feel guilty or restless or empty, that's not drive. That's fear dressed up as discipline. There's a concept in agriculture that civilizations used for thousands of years before we decided we knew better. It's called fallow ground. You leave a field unplanted, not because you've given up on it, but because soil that has worked without pause eventually stops giving. It needs to do nothing for a season. That emptiness is not waste. It's restoration. It's the invisible work that makes future growth possible. Your mind works exactly like that. The research on this, and there's quite a lot of it consistently, points to the same thing. The brain's so-called default mode network, which activates when you're not focused on a task, is doing some of the most important processing available to you. Memory consolidation, emotional integration, creative insight. The connections that don't emerge when you're grinding, they surface when you're quiet. The shower realization is real. The answer that comes on the walk is real. The thing that becomes clear when you stop staring at it, that's real. But none of it happens if you never stop staring. So when you sit with your cold coffee and do nothing for 20 minutes, something is working. You just can't see it. And we've built a world where invisible work doesn't count, which means we've built a world at war with some of the most essential things the human mind does. Blaise Pascal, 17th century mathematician, not exactly known for cheerfulness, wrote something in his notebooks that has not aged a single day. He said, roughly translated, all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly alone in a room. That's an outrageous claim, but the longer you sit with it, the harder it is to dismiss. Because what happens when you're truly still and alone with no input? You meet yourself. And for many people, including people who are accomplished, intelligent, caring, thoughtful people, that meeting is uncomfortable. Not because there's something wrong with them, but because the unanswered questions surface, the things you've been busy enough to avoid, the subtle sense that something is off, or missing, or unresolved. Distraction is not laziness. Distraction is avoidance with excellent PR, and our modern environment has made avoidance into an ambient condition. You don't have to choose distraction anymore. It chooses you, automatically. Every time your attention is unoccupied for more than 30 seconds, Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop his framework of meaning, wrote about what he called the existential vacuum, the feeling of inner emptiness that emerges when a person has no clear sense of meaning or direction. His observation was that this vacuum isn't filled by activity, it's revealed by the absence of it. which means busyness is often a way of not having to answer the most important question. What is this for? Stillness doesn't create that emptiness. It just stops hiding it. And that, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of something real. The Stoics had a practice called otium. It gets translated as leisure, but that's too soft a word. It meant deliberate, unstructured, non-productive time, used not for entertainment but for reflection. Marcus Aurelius, who ran an empire, carved it out. Seneca wrote about it extensively. He argued that people who never withdraw from the world's demands never truly live in it. They're always reacting, never understanding. This is not a prescription to become passive. The Stoics were not passive. Marcus Aurelius led armies. Seneca worked for decades in politics. The point was that doing without periodically stopping to understand why you're doing it leads to a particular kind of lostness, motion without direction, output without meaning. What they were describing is something that has nothing to do with being idle. It's more like maintenance of the compass, the thing that tells you where you actually want to go, not where momentum or expectation or anxiety is carrying you. Here's what's practical about this. When you can sit still without filling the silence, you regain access to your own signal. You start to hear what you actually think, not what you've absorbed, not what the feed delivered, not the performance of productivity. What you think. What actually matters to you, specifically. What's been nagging at you that you've been too busy to address? That's not laziness. That's navigation, and you cannot navigate when you are always in motion. I want to leave you with 3 questions. Not tasks, not action items. Questions that are worth sitting with. Maybe literally. The first one. When you stop moving, what feeling arrives first? Not what thought, what feeling? Is it rest, guilt, anxiety, relief, boredom? That first feeling is telling you something important about your relationship to yourself. The second, what are you too busy to think about? There's almost always something. A decision deferred, a feeling suppressed, a question that keeps surfacing and getting pushed down. Busyness is often precision targeted at exactly that thing. What is yours? And the third, if slowing down doesn't make you less, if the fallow ground produces more, not less, what would you stop doing? Not what would you add? What would you stop? You don't have to answer these now. In fact, you probably shouldn't. Let them sit, come back to them in the space you create. Remember that voice from the beginning, the one that says you're wasting time, that everyone else is moving. Here's what that voice doesn't. It doesn't know the difference between a field that's resting and a field that's dead. It can't see underground. It measures only what's visible, motion, output, noise, and declares everything else a failure. But you are not a factory. You are not a productivity metric. You are a person trying to live a life that means something, and that project requires more than relentless forward motion. It requires you to stop sometimes, to sit in the room Pascal described, to let the questions surface that the rushing keeps buried. Stillness is not laziness. It is the most disciplined thing a person in this age can practice, because everything around you is designed to prevent it. Every notification, every feed, every next thing. They are all betting that you will never stop long enough to ask whether any of it is taking you somewhere you actually want to go. You can prove them wrong by doing almost nothing at all. Sit with that.